Stop for a second. Think about the closest call you have ever had. The car that almost hit you. The fall that should have broken your neck. The night your body burned with fever and you felt something slipping away. Your heart was racing. Your breath was shallow. And then somehow you were fine. You called it luck. You told yourself you escaped. But what if you didn't? What if in that exact moment there was a version of reality where everything went wrong, where the impact happened, where your body didn't recover, where the story ended, and the only reason you are here right now is because you cannot experience that ending. Your awareness cannot exist in a world where you are gone. So it continues, not because you were saved, not because you were chosen, but because there is always a version where you survive. And that is the only place you can ever be. To understand why this idea might be true, you need to let go of something very basic that you have believed your entire life. The idea that reality only picks one outcome, that events happen one way and not another, that a coin lands heads or tails, and that is the end of the story. But at the deepest level of physics, this assumption starts to break down, because in quantum mechanics, the rules are not built on certainty. They are built on possibilities, and those possibilities do not disappear when a result is observed. There is an interpretation of quantum physics called the many worlds interpretation, first proposed by Hugh Everett, and its claim is simple but disturbing. The universe does not choose between outcomes. It keeps all of them. Every possible result of every quantum event actually happens. Not one, not some, but all, each in its own separate branch of reality. Imagine the universe not as a single line moving forward in time, but as a constantly splitting structure, like a tree that branches again and again with every moment, every decision. Every microscopic event at the quantum level, each branch is a complete and real version of reality with its own history, its own future, its own version of you. Now think about something as small as an electron. In quantum mechanics, before you measure it, it does not have a single definite state. It exists in what is called a superposition, meaning it holds multiple possibilities at once. When a measurement happens, we usually say the wave function collapses and one outcome is selected. But in the many worlds interpretation, nothing collapses. Instead, the universe splits one branch where the electron behaves one way, another branch where it behaves differently. Both outcomes are equally real, equally physical, equally valid. And this is not just happening once in a while. It is happening constantly, everywhere, at every scale. Every interaction, every photon, every particle, every moment is generating new branches of reality. Now, bring this idea back to something familiar. Imagine flipping a coin. You think there is a 50% chance of heads and 50% chance of tails? And when the coin lands, one of those possibilities disappears. But in this framework, both results happen. There is a branch where the coin lands heads and a branch where it lands tails. And from your perspective, you only ever see one result, but that does not mean the other one vanished. It simply means you are not in that branch. Now scale this up to your entire life. Every choice you make, every accident that almost happened, every event that could have gone differently, all of those possibilities exist somewhere in this constantly branching structure of reality. There is a version of you that turned left instead of right, a version that missed a flight, a version that never met certain people, and more importantly, a version that did not survive certain moments. The key idea here is that reality is not a single path. It is a collection of all possible paths unfolding at once. And what you experience is just one thread within that vast structure. But here is where things start to become unsettling. Because if all outcomes exist, then outcomes you fear also exist, including the ones where things end, where your body fails, where accidents are not avoided, where survival does not happen. Those branches are just as real as the one you are in right now, and yet you are not aware of them. You never wake up inside those outcomes. You never find yourself experiencing the version where everything went wrong. And that leads to a deeper question. If the universe truly splits into all possible outcomes, and if versions of you exist in every one of those branches, then why does your experience always seem to continue in the direction where you are still here? Why do you never find yourself in the branch where the story stops? The many worlds interpretation does not answer this directly, but it creates the conditions for a very strange conclusion. Because if every outcome happens, and if your awareness can only exist in states where your brain is functioning, then there is a built-in filter on what you can experience. You are not moving through a single predetermined reality. You are moving through a structure where all possibilities exist. But your experience is limited to the paths where you are still able to experience anything at all. And that changes the way you should think about survival. Because survival might not be something that happens randomly. It might be something that is guaranteed from your point of view. Not because the universe protects you, but because every branch where you do not make it simply cannot be observed by you. And what remains is a continuous stream of moments where you are still here, still aware, still watching the next event unfold. Now take that idea and stop looking at it from a distance. Stop thinking about particles and abstract possibilities, and put yourself inside the experiment, because this is where it stops being theory and starts becoming something personal, something that feels wrong at a very deep level. Imagine you are sitting alone in a quiet room. There is a device in front of you, a simple, cold, mechanical, a gun aimed directly at your head. But this is not an ordinary trigger. It is not controlled by a clock or your hand. It is connected to a quantum measurement, something as small and unpredictable as the spin of an electron. If the electron is measured in one state, the gun fires. If it is measured in the other state, the gun does nothing. It just clicks. And according to quantum mechanics, before the measurement happens, both outcomes exist at the same time. The electron is not one or the other. It is both. Now, think carefully about what that means for you. You are not watching this happen. You are inside it. You are the one in the chair. Your heart is beating faster. Your hands feel cold. You press the button. What do you expect to happen? Everything in your mind tells you this is a 50-50 chance. Half the time you live, half the time everything goes dark. That is how probability feels. That is how we are trained to think. But if the many worlds interpretation is correct, that is not what happens at all. The universe does not choose one outcome and discard the other. It splits. In one branch, the electron is measured in the state that fires the gun. In another branch, it is measured in the state that leaves you alive. Both outcomes happen. Both realities exist. But here is the part that breaks your intuition. You cannot find yourself in both because you cannot experience the branch where the gun fired. There is no awareness there. no thoughts, no continuation. So from your point of view, from inside your own experience, you press the button and you hear a click. You flinch. You breathe. You are still there. It feels like you got lucky. But that feeling is misleading, because in another branch of reality, the gun did fire. Your body is in the chair. Everything ended. But you are not there to witness it. You cannot be... Now imagine doing it again. You press the button a second time. Again, the universe splits. Again, one branch where the gun fires and one where it does not. And again, you only ever find yourself in the branch where you are still alive. Click. You survive. Now do it again and again. Each time the number of branches where you are gone increases, while the branches where you survive become rarer and rarer from an outside perspective. But from your perspective, something very strange is happening. You never experience failure. You never experience the end. Every time you press the button, the result is the same. You are still here. It starts to feel impossible. It starts to feel like the machine is broken, like reality is bending around you. But it is not bending. It is just splitting. And your awareness is following a very specific rule. It can only continue along paths where it is still possible to continue. Now think about how disturbing that is, because it means the experiment does not feel like a gamble from the inside. It feels like certainty, no matter how many times you repeat it, no matter how unlikely survival becomes in the larger picture. Your subjective experience is always the same. You press the button and you live, not because the odds favor you, but because there is no version of you that can observe the alternative. This thought experiment is called quantum suicide, and it is not meant to be performed. It is meant to reveal something about the nature of experience itself. It forces you to confront a gap between objective probability and subjective reality from the outside. Your chances of survival drop with every attempt, approaching zero. But from the inside, the probability of you experiencing survival is always 1, because the only experiences available to you are the ones where you are still capable of having experiences. And that is the moment where the idea becomes unsettling, because it suggests that survival is not something that happens to you. It is something built into the structure of your awareness. You are not just a participant in a random process. You are an observer that can only ever exist on the side of outcomes, where observation is still possible. And once you see it that way, the experiment stops being about a gun or an electron and starts being about your entire life. Every close call, every moment where things could have ended but did not, begins to look different. Not like a narrow escape, but like a path that your awareness had no choice but to follow. Now take a step back and look at what you have been calling luck your entire life, because there is a pattern hidden in it that most people never question. Every time you hear a story about survival, it always comes from the person who made it through, the one who walked away from the crash, the one who recovered from the illness, the one who missed the disaster by seconds. And they all say the same thing. I was lucky. I had a feeling. Something saved me. But there is something deeply misleading about that perspective, because you are only ever hearing from the survivors. The ones who did not make it are not here to tell their version of the story. And this is what we call survivorship bias, a distortion of reality where we only see the outcomes that continue and completely ignore the outcomes that end. Now bring that idea back into the framework of a branching universe, where every possible outcome actually exists. Because in that structure, Every dangerous moment in your life does not have a single result. It has many. In some branches you walk away unharmed. In others you are injured. And in others you do not survive at all. All of those versions are equally real. But there is a crucial difference. Only one type of version can be experienced by you. The ones where you are still capable of experiencing anything. And that creates a powerful illusion, because from your point of view it looks like you keep getting lucky over and over again. But what you are really seeing is a filtered version of reality. A version where all the failed outcomes are invisible to you. Imagine a lottery with millions of players. Only one person wins. And that person goes on television and says, "I knew it would happen. I just believed. I just felt it." But what you do not see are the millions of people who lost and disappeared from the narrative. Now replace those millions of people with millions of versions of you, each facing the same moment, the same risk, the same event. In most of those branches, the outcome is not survival, but those branches are silent. They have no voice, no observer left to describe what happened. So from the inside, it feels like a streak of impossible luck, a pattern of survival that defies probability. But from the outside, it is exactly what you would expect in a system where all possibilities are realized. You are simply the version that continues, the one thread that remains visible because it has not been cut. And this is why the idea of luck becomes unstable under this perspective. Because luck assumes that many possible outcomes were reduced to one, and that one just happened to favor you. But in a branching universe, the outcomes were not reduced. They all occurred, and you are only aware of the subset where you are still present. This is not luck. This is selection. A selection that happens automatically based on the only condition that matters: whether or not there is still an observer to experience the result. Now think about how this changes the meaning of survival, because it suggests that survival is not something rare from your point of view. It is something inevitable, not because the dangerous outcomes do not exist, but because you cannot be in them. And this creates a kind of one-sided reality, where every story you remember, every close call you survived, every moment where things could have gone differently but did not, forms a consistent narrative of continuation. A story where you are always still here at the end of it. And the more times this happens, the stronger the illusion becomes, because each new survival reinforces the idea that you are somehow favored, somehow protected, somehow different. But that feeling is built on incomplete information. It is built on the absence of all the versions of you that are no longer part of the story. And once you see that, once you understand that your entire perspective is shaped by this filter, the idea of luck starts to collapse. It stops being a mysterious force and starts looking like a consequence of how experience works. You are not witnessing a random sample of all outcomes. You are witnessing a very specific slice, the slice where you continue. And that slice, by definition, will always look like survival, no matter how unlikely it becomes in the larger structure of reality. And that is what makes this idea so unsettling, because it means that every time you say, "I got lucky," what you might really be saying is, "I am still here." And all the versions of me that were not lucky are simply not here to say anything at all. Now bring all of this out of theory and into your own life, because this is where the idea stops being abstract and starts feeling uncomfortably real. Think about the moments you have already lived through, the times when something almost happened but didn't, the late night drive where your eyes closed for a second too long, the sudden illness that came out of nowhere, the accident that should have ended differently. You remember the moment clearly, the tension, the fear, the instant where everything could have gone another way, and then the release. You made it through. You told yourself it was a miracle, or luck, or timing. But now look at those same moments through a different lens, a lens where every possible outcome did not compete to become real, but all became real at the same time. In that structure, every close call you have ever had is not a single event with a single outcome. It is a point where reality split into multiple versions. In some of those versions, you walked away exactly as you remember. But in others, the story did not continue the same way. And the only reason you do not remember those versions is because there is no version of you there to remember anything at all. Now, take something even more familiar. The experience of dying in a dream. You have probably had it at least once. A fall from a height, a crash. A moment where you know it is over, and then right at the point of impact, you wake up. Your heart is racing. Your body is tense, and you feel relief. It was just a dream. But what if that interpretation is too simple? What if that moment of waking up is not just your brain protecting you, but the only version of the experience you are capable of continuing? In one branch of reality, the event completed. In another, it did not. And your awareness followed the only path where it could still exist, the path where you opened your eyes again. This is not something you can prove, but it is something the logic allows. And that is what makes it unsettling, because it means that even your most private experiences, your dreams, your near misses, can be reinterpreted under the same framework. Now think about the stories people tell after surviving something they should not have survived. The driver who fell asleep at the wheel and woke up in a wrecked car without a scratch. The patient whose condition suddenly reversed when there was no reason for it to. The swimmer who was pulled under by the ocean and somehow washed back to shore. We call these events miracles. We call them rare. We treat them as exceptions to the normal flow of cause and effect. But in a branching universe, they are not exceptions. They are simply the versions of events where survival still happened, while the other versions, the more probable one, exist just as fully but remain unobserved from your perspective. And this changes something fundamental about how you interpret your own story. Because instead of seeing your life as a sequence of unlikely survivals, you begin to see it as a continuous thread selected from a much larger set of possibilities. A thread that you are locked into because it is the only one that still contains an observer. Now extend this idea beyond yourself. Think about people you know. People who had close calls. People who told you stories about how they almost died and how they somehow made it through. From their perspective, it looks the same. They feel lucky. They feel chosen. But from a broader view, each of those stories is just one branch among many. The one that continued. And this also explains why you never encounter the opposite perspective. You never meet the version of someone who did not survive their own story, because that version does not have a voice. It does not have a perspective. It does not exist as an experience. And so your entire world becomes filled with narratives of survival, reinforcing the idea that survival is common, that escape is possible, that things tend to work out, when in reality you are only seeing one side of a much larger structure. A structure where all outcomes are present, but only some are visible. And the deeper you follow this logic, the harder it becomes to hold on to the idea of randomness in the way you used to. because what you call random might simply be the result of which branch you find yourself in. And what you call a miracle might simply be the only branch you were capable of experiencing. And once you start to see your life this way, every close call begins to feel different. Not like a narrow escape, but like a checkpoint where the path could have ended in many ways. Yet from your perspective, it never does. It always continues. And that continuity, that uninterrupted stream of awareness, starts to feel less like a coincidence and more like a rule you are bound to, whether you understand it or not. At this point, it is easy to misunderstand what all of this implies, because there is a very tempting conclusion waiting for you. If you can only experience the branches where you survive, then it sounds like you are invincible, like nothing can truly end your story, like you are protected by the structure of reality itself. But this is where the idea turns, and it turns hard, because survival is not the same thing as being okay. It is not the same thing as being whole, or healthy, or even conscious in the way you are right now. The many worlds interpretation does not guarantee that you remain intact. It only guarantees that there is some version of you, somewhere, where awareness has not completely stopped. And that distinction changes everything. Because when you imagine survival, you imagine walking away. You imagine recovering. You imagine continuing your life more or less as it is. But that is only one type of survival. And as time moves forward, as your body ages, as entropy increases, the probability of that kind of clean survival starts to shrink. Slowly at first, then faster, until it becomes almost impossible. Think about an accident. In some branches you die instantly. In others you survive with injuries. In others you survive but with permanent damage. And in a very small number you walk away untouched. When you are young, those untouched branches are still relatively common. But as you get older, as your body becomes more fragile, as disease and failure become more likely, those branches start to disappear. Not completely, but they become so rare that they no longer dominate the set of possible outcomes. And yet your awareness still has to go somewhere. It still has to follow a path where experience continues. So where does it go? It goes to the branches that remain, the ones where you are still alive, but not necessarily well. This is the trap, because survival starts to mean something very different. It no longer means continuing life as you know it. It means continuing in whatever form is still physically possible, even if that form is diminished, limited, or broken. Imagine reaching an age where your organs begin to fail, where your body can no longer maintain itself. In many branches, that is where life ends. But in others, there are interventions, machines, treatments, unlikely recoveries, temporary stabilizations, each one less probable than the last, but still not impossible. And because they are not impossible, they exist as branches. And because they exist, your awareness can follow them. Not because they are likely, but because they are the only remaining paths where awareness has not been completely extinguished. Now push this further. Imagine a situation where your body can no longer function on its own, where survival depends on external support, where your experience is reduced, altered, or fragmented. From the outside, this looks like a diminishing life, something that should eventually end. But from the inside, from the perspective of awareness, it is still continuation. It is still the only available path. And as long as there is even a tiny chance for that continuation to persist, that is where experience goes. This is what turns the idea of immortality into something far more disturbing. Because it is not a clean, stable extension of life. It is a drift into increasingly narrow and unlikely states of existence, each one just barely sustaining the condition needed for awareness to remain. You do not jump to a perfect version of survival. You slide into whatever version has not yet collapsed. And this is where the concept becomes deeply uncomfortable, because it suggests that there may not be a clean ending from your point of view. Not a moment where everything simply stops in a way you can experience. Instead, there may be a long, uneven transition through states that are harder and harder to sustain, each one held together by the smallest remaining probabilities. And from the outside, this would look like a series of improbable survivals, medical anomalies, cases that do not follow expectations. But from the inside, it would feel like a continuous thread. No matter how fragile it becomes, no matter how far it drifts from what you once considered normal life. And that is the real cost hidden inside this idea. Because it removes the simplicity of an ending and replaces it with a process. A process where awareness continues not because it is thriving, but because it has not yet completely failed. And once you see that, the idea of being unable to die stops sounding like a gift and starts sounding like something else entirely. Something that holds you inside existence, even when existence is no longer what it used to be. Now follow this idea one step further, because once you accept that, your experience always continues along the branches where you are still alive. Something else begins to shift in a way that is much harder to ignore. If your awareness is always anchored to your own survival, then every other person you know is not anchored the same way in your experience. They exist in your world. You see them. You talk to them. You build memories with them. But their continuity is not guaranteed from your point of view, because your experience is not centered on them. It is centered on you. And this creates a strange imbalance, one that is easy to miss at first, because in everyday life, everything feels shared. It feels like you and everyone around you are moving through the same reality together. But under this framework, that assumption becomes unstable, because while your awareness is forced to follow paths where you continue, there is no such rule for anyone else within your experience. Which means that over time, as events unfold, as entropy increases, as accidents and failures accumulate, the people around you will begin to disappear from your timeline. Not all at once, but gradually, one by one. In some branches they continue, in others they do not. And since your awareness is not tied to their survival, you will inevitably experience the branches where they are gone. This is not because those branches are more real, but because they are simply part of the structure. And your path through that structure does not preserve others the way it preserves you. Now think about what that implies over a long enough span of time. Think about your parents, your friends, the people you care about most. In a branching universe, there are always versions of reality where they live longer, where things go differently, where outcomes change. But from your perspective, you do not move freely between all those possibilities. You move along a continuous line of experience, and along that line, there will be points where they are no longer there. And when those points are reached, your awareness does not jump to a version where everything is restored. because your continuity is not defined by their existence. It is defined by your own, so you remain in the branch where they are gone. And this process repeats again and again across every relationship, every connection, every shared moment, until the pattern becomes unavoidable. Everyone else is temporary within your experience, not because they are less real, but because their survival is not the condition that keeps your awareness active. And this is where the idea begins to feel isolating, because it suggests that no matter how many people are in your life, no matter how strong the connections are, you are the only one whose continuity is guaranteed from your point of view. Everyone else exists within that continuity, but they do not define it. Now take this further into something even more unsettling, because if your awareness is the center of your experience, and if everything you perceive exists as part of that experience, then what exactly are the people around you within that structure? Are they independent observers like you, each following their own path through their own branches? Or are they simply part of the environment that your awareness moves through? Part of the system that generates your experience? This question does not have a clear answer, but it leads directly into an old philosophical idea called solipsism. The idea that the only thing you can be certain exists is your own mind. Everything else could be something else entirely. Something that appears real, but is not directly accessible in the same way your own awareness is. And when you combine that idea with a branching universe, it becomes even more disorienting. Because now the world around you is not just uncertain in its nature. It is also unstable in its continuity. People appear, people disappear, and your experience moves forward regardless, always centered on the same point, your own awareness. Now imagine extending this across a lifetime. Imagine watching everyone you know eventually leave your timeline. Not because the universe is targeting them, but because your path through the branching structure does not preserve them indefinitely. You attend their funerals. You remember their voices. You carry their absence, but you do not follow them into the branches where they continue, because your awareness does not move in that way. It moves forward along its own line. And as that line extends, the number of people remaining in it decreases. Not instantly, not dramatically, but steadily, until you begin to notice something that cannot be ignored. You are always the one who is still here, and everyone else is eventually part of the past within your experience. And this leads to a kind of isolation that is not based on physical distance or emotional disconnection, but on the structure of experience itself. A structure where you are the only constant, the only observer that persists, while everything else changes, fades, or disappears. And once you see that pattern, once you recognize that your experience is built this way, the world starts to feel different, not empty, not unreal, but centered in a way that is impossible to fully share. Because no matter how close you get to someone, no matter how much you try to align your life with theirs, your awareness remains bound to its own path. And that path, by its very nature, does not guarantee that anyone else will remain on it forever. At this point, the question is no longer about whether you can die. It becomes something much deeper, something that sits underneath everything you have been thinking about so far. Because if your awareness can only ever continue along paths where it still exists, then your experience is not just happening inside reality. It is defining what reality is for you in the first place. Everything you see, everything you hear, every moment you remember, All of it only exists as part of your experience while you are aware of it. And the moment awareness stops, there is no version of that experience left to you. Not darkness, not silence, just nothing at all. Not as something you can perceive, but as the complete absence of perception. And that means, from your point of view, reality does not have an accessible state where you are gone. It only has states where you are still present to witness it. Now connect this back to the idea of a branching universe, where every possible outcome exists. Because within that structure, there are countless versions of reality where your awareness ends. But you will never find yourself in any of them. You will only ever find yourself in the versions where something continues. No matter how unlikely, no matter how fragile, no matter how different it becomes from what you recognize as your current life. And that leads to a realization that is easy to miss but impossible to ignore once you see it clearly. You are not just moving through a fixed world that exists independently of you. You are moving through a set of possible worlds. And the only ones that ever become real to you are the ones where you are there to experience them. In that sense, your awareness acts like a filter, selecting which parts of the larger structure become your reality, not by choice, not by intention, but by necessity, because without awareness, there is no experience. And without experience, there is no reality from your point of view. Now think about how strange that is, because it means that for you, the continuation of reality is tied directly to the continuation of your awareness, not in an absolute sense for the universe as a whole, but in the only sense that matters to you, the sense of what is actually experienced. If your awareness is present, the world continues. If it is not, there is nothing left to describe, nothing left to observe, nothing left to exist as an experience. And this shifts the entire perspective. Because instead of seeing yourself as a small part inside a vast and indifferent universe, you begin to see that the universe you know is inseparable from the fact that you are here to observe it. You are not creating it in a physical sense, but you are the point where it becomes something instead of nothing, at least within your own frame of reference. And that is where the idea reaches its final form, because it removes the concept of a personal ending in any meaningful way. There is no moment. You can step outside your own awareness and watch it stop. There is no frame where you can observe your own absence. There is only the continuous unfolding of moments where you are still here, still aware, still inside the next event, and the next, and the next. This is not a promise of comfort. It does not guarantee happiness or meaning or even coherence. It only guarantees continuation from your point of view. And that can feel like a gift or a burden, depending on how you see it. But it leaves you with one unavoidable conclusion. If you cannot experience the end of your own story, then the only thing that ever truly exists for you is what you choose to do with the part that continues, the part that is happening right now, the part that you are inside at this very moment. Because no matter what the larger structure of reality looks like, no matter how many branches exist beyond your reach, you are always here, at the center of your own experience. And that is the only place where anything can ever matter.